Coming up on this edition of In the Line of Duty, how cons try to scam cops and what you can do about it.
Never allow them to have any of your personal information. Always keep your relationship on a professional level. If the guy asks you, how you doing today? Fine. Outside of that, and what's going on maybe in the unit, things that are pertaining to work. Those are the things that you can discuss with the inmate, but never allow yourself to disclose any of your personal information to the inmate because they'll use it against you.
Look at the electronic gizmos for law enforcement at Trexpo. And Porky Pig takes an unexpected detour on a Missouri highway. Lessons learned by the officers involved in the line of duty.
With the U.S. prison population at 1 million plus, sometimes you'd think there are as many scams as there are cons. Hello and welcome to In the Line of Duty. I'm Don Marsh.
And I'm Ron Barber. Don, whether you're a cop with a prisoner or a corrections officer with an inmate, falling for a scam could cost you your job or your life. Law enforcement officers always need to remember that
if an inmate had a job description, it would be to lie, to cheat, to steal, and to manipulate, and to get away with as much illegal activity as possible.
Doglietto says new officers may be upset to learn that inmate lying is only part of a con's job description.
There are a lot of times when disciplinary action is necessary because an inmate has done something that is against the rules. And they will try their best to talk their way out of it. Either they'll try to convince you that you did not see what you saw, or that they had no choice. They had to do what you caught them doing, or if for some reason, if they did not do that, something terrible would happen to them. I had to do it, or they were going to kill me. We hear this quite a bit, especially when it's narcotics-related activity. Be aware that the inmate may not be telling you the truth, and that you examine physical evidence and you make your decision using good law enforcement techniques, such as collecting evidence, eyewitnesses, and stuff like that. No matter what led up to the commission of the crime or the rules infraction still occurred, or the crime still occurred. So you have to proceed in that manner.
And he adds, inmate truth stretching gets especially good where hidden contraband is concerned.
Inmates are very creative about where they hide contraband and dangerous contraband such as weapons. So you must always be aware that what you're walking past might just not be a garbage can. It might actually be a place where they're hiding weapons. So stop for a moment and look through the garbage bag. If it's a plastic bag, lift it up, see what's underneath it. Tilt the garbage can over, look at the bottom, see if it's actually being used to conceal weapons. And you have to do this everywhere you walk. I mean, even if you walk past a common area in the housing unit that has tables or benches, bend over, look underneath the benches, see if there's anything taped on it. Look underneath the table, see if there's anything taped underneath there. Because quite often inmates will have weapons in reserve in a housing unit for that one particular moment when one side decides to go off on the other. So you have to be aware that just because it's calm and quiet doesn't mean that they're not prepared for when it is a melee or a riot. One thing that does occur at older facilities especially is that the staff that have been there for years tend to be a little bit more complacent. They don't conduct their responsibilities, their chores, their jobs as thoroughly as they should. And they have that nothing ever happens here mentality. It's not going to happen on my shift, and generally then you'll have new staff who become very upset because somebody's not doing their job, and they'll complain a lot. But what you have to realize is that security is paramount. So even if somebody isn't doing their job, instead of complaining about them not doing their job, security comes first. If somebody is not checking an inmate cart as he's coming down the corridor with a paint cart or something like that, then check it for him. Make sure that at some point that cart gets checked.
If inmates are not getting pat-downs when you feel they should, Doglietto says simply, do it yourself.
If an inmate is coming from a work site and he doesn't get a cursory pat search because the officer didn't do it, stop the inmate and do it yourself. In particular, if you have a gate officer whose responsibility is to check mop buckets that are coming down the corridor and being with the water being dumped out in the exercise yard, and the officer doesn't check the mop buckets, don't complain that he's not checking the mop buckets. Go check the mop buckets, because it's an easy way for inmates to transport weapons from the housing units out to the exercise yard. So it's imperative that even if you see that somebody's not doing the job, security comes first. Go do it for them.
He also warns that once an inmate has burrowed his way into an officer's good graces, it may be too late.
Staff can become overly familiar with the inmates and become actually what I call chummy. And this can cause quite a problem as well, because you begin to lose that line between custody and inmate, and peace officer and inmate. And so you have to maintain that professionalism and realize that you are on one side of the line, the green side of the line, and the inmate is on the other side of the line, or here, the blue side of the line, and you never cross that line. A lot of staff, especially the younger staff I've noticed, are finding that the inmates are like people that they've known on the streets, or that they can assimilate through television or music videos, something of that nature, and they don't see the inmate as quite the societal problem that resulted in his being put in here, and they become very friendly with the inmates. And this is a problem, because it leads to overfamiliarity, which can be result in the loss of your employment.
Doglietto says something as seemingly simple as an inmate asking for a cigarette can ultimately lead to inmate manipulation, even inmate extortion.
Generally, it starts with something as simple as the inmate asks him for maybe a cigarette or a cigarette lighter, which are very popular here since we've banned their use. And as soon as the officer capitulates and gives him a cigarette lighter, because he seems like a pretty good guy, the inmate will use that against you and will ask you for more and more stuff until you're in a position where he's asking you to do something illegal. And if you don't do it, he's going to report you for initially giving him that cigarette lighter. So you really have to be very cautious about the way that you interact with the inmates, and realize that even the smallest favor that an inmate is asking could lead to potential loss of your job, if not felony prosecution if it's an illegal activity.
He adds that what is fair for one inmate should be fair for another.
And the other thing that you have to consider is that you never do one thing for one inmate that you would not do for another. So if an inmate needs a roll of toilet paper for his cell, of course you're going to provide him with that toilet paper, but if another inmate walks up and says, I need a roll of toilet paper too, you can't say, no, I'm not going to give it to you, because that's over familiarity with the first inmate. So you have to realize that whenever you're working in a housing unit, that you have to treat all the inmates equally and fairly. What I say is fair, firm, and consistent.
One crucial time officers must be fair and firm is during an inmate melee. Fair, firm, and safe.
I found that the communication skills are probably your best tool for maintaining peace as well as safety and security of the housing unit. And quite often you can diffuse a very tense situation just with a little humor. But as long as you can talk to them in a humanly way, generally they'll listen to you and stop whatever activity it is that they're doing. This works, I would say 90% of the time, but always be prepared for that 10% of the time that it's not going to work. But there are things that you have at your disposal. One can be a command presence, the other is a command voice, but also you have to follow that command voice up with, when they begin to stop their activity, with a tone that is more humanly or friendly. And then you establish a dialogue with the inmate, and generally you can solve any problem that exists in the housing unit.
There is certainly no lack of famous or infamous prisons or cons in them who will constantly try to get over on officers. Among those that evoke a cop's most immediate awareness is unquestionably San Quentin. Here, it's always been state-of-the-art when it comes to cons, shucking, jiving, and conniving officers. Searching, or lack of it, say veterans, can get you into a world of hurt.
They should continue to do the same thing every time, because these inmates try to gain the officer's trust over a period of time, and they rely on people getting weak in their search techniques, and the phrase we use, that they're not going to complete the entire search that they normally would after time and time out coming into the same officer, and that officer sees the inmate with the item and believes it to be something harmless. And the con will eventually wear the officer down to where he goes, well, yeah, I know I don't need to search that. I know that's where you keep your comb or your pencil or so forth. They'll use an item, like for instance a comb or a pencil or something that, that could be mistaken for a weapon. And the officer searching the inmate and finds this item on the inmate and has the inmate show it to him. And they'll do this day in, day out until the officers, get to the point where the officer believes that that's the comb or that's the pencil or pen that the inmate's carrying on him, and they don't have them remove it every time. They allow the inmate to go on, okay, well, I know that's your pencil or that's your comb that you keep in your sock. And on that particular day, the inmate will be bringing a weapon through the security line.
Not only are concealed weapons a problem you need to address, but also items that are right there in your face can be lethal too.
There are certain areas that they can hide items in their cells or on their persons where you wouldn't even think that to look. And some of those things that you'll learn as you go along, and you'll see these things. For instance, you might see an inmate walking along. He has a magic marker in his pocket, and you pull it open and it works. And even the magic marker works. It looks normal. However, if you don't go the extra step, you wouldn't find the syringe that the inmate had hidden inside the marking pen. And they rely on these things. This one's sawed off. It's cut down. Plunger, and of course the needle was removed here for safety reasons. And there was recently an alert put out from one of the institutions, but that they were hiding items inside the speed sticks or the stick deodorants. And I've been finding it over the past 10 years that I've been doing my searches in the investigations unit that first couple of years I started there, I found out that they're good hiding places. You look inside the speed stick here, for instance, you're in a cell and you're searching, and it works fine. It rolls out. Looks good. You can't tell anything. But if you take it all the way out, the inmate might have some bundles of drugs hidden down inside, and that's a good place to conceal things. That's just one of many places that the inmates hide things, and they make it look natural, and it's easy for somebody to overlook.
And during searches of the inmate's home or cell, cons will often try to work you.
Another thing that overfamiliarity can lead to is when you're getting ready to search cells in a certain area of the institution, a particular officer who's established an overfamiliar relationship with an inmate might be assigned to search that inmate's cell. And he might be thinking in the back of his mind, well, this guy's a good guy. I know him. He would never do anything. He would never hold a weapon or any drugs in his house. And they may not be as thorough as they would be with any other inmates. So that's what the inmates rely on. They're really kind to you and saying, hey, don't tear my house up. Be gentle with me there with my stuff. And they con the officer into doing a half the job that they normally would have done. So and then they're able to to keep items inside the cell. And other inmates see this too, and they may ask that inmate. They know that this inmate's got a rapport with the officer, and that they're not going to get searched as well as they would, and they'll ask this inmate to hold items for them. And a lot of times the inmate might be under pressure himself from the other inmates to hold things, contraband items and weapons in his cell, because they know that this officer's not going to go in there and he's not going to search that inmate's cell. So they do that also. We found a lot of weapons and contraband over the years, or the pillows and the mattresses. They'll cut little slits in the mattresses and they'll secrete items in there. It's important that you search every area of the mattress. You can't just search one end or the other. You have to search the entire thing, the entire pillow. They'll rely on the fact that officers don't like to get their hands dirty. We have gloves, but they'll hide a lot of things in the trash bags. They'll have a bunch of gross trash items, rotten apples and you name it, rags that they blew their nose with. They'll throw it in the trash bag, and they know the officer's not going to want to go through that, but that's where they're going to hide a lot of their contraband items. You'll dump the trash bag out and you'll go through the wrapped up wrappers at the bottom of the bag, and a lot of times you're going to find their drugs are wrapped inside the wrappers, or my partner found a hypodermic syringe inside a potato chip bag wrapped up in the bottom of one time. So they rely on you not to search certain areas. They know a lot of people don't like to get up underneath the bunks, and because it's hard to get down and you're going to get dirty when you crawl up underneath there, so they'll tape a lot of things up underneath the bunk frames. And they'll tape a lot of things up underneath the toilets and the sinks and in the vents and areas where a lot of people don't take that extra effort, and they don't want to take the effort to get down there because they're afraid they're going to get dirty. It's a dirty job sometimes, but you have to do it by the numbers or you're going to miss things.
Doing by the numbers will be the feature of regular correction segments in upcoming editions of In the Line of Duty. Be watching for them. You may find a lifesaver.
Now to questions. Do you agree with Officer Daglietto, who says, if an inmate had a job description, it would be to lie, cheat, and steal? If you believe the statement, what should that tell you about your day-to-day dealings with convicts? Have you ever let an inmate or arrested subject talk you out of an infraction? Why? What are the most creative spots for hiding contraband you have ever seen in a jail or prison environment? Have you ever allowed yourself to become over-familiar with an inmate? Explain the circumstances and how you ultimately dealt with it. Can you see where an inmate's requests could possibly get you in serious trouble? Can the strategic use of humor in quelling an inmate disturbance be beneficial, as Officer Daglietto suggested? Have you ever used it? Officer Pilicelli says corrections officers should search the same way every time so they don't miss anything. Does that make sense to you? If not, why not? Have you ever missed the obvious during either an inmate pat-down or during a cell search? What was it? What do you feel are the biggest mistakes new corrections officers make? The biggest hurdles they face when dealing with hardened criminals? If an inmate you feel is a good guy asks you not to mess up his or her house too much during a search, what is your response?